Welcome to the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Join us each week as we sit down with the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management and author of Your Fiscal Physical, Ryan Nelson. Tune in to gain valuable insights and practical tips as we simplify complex financial concepts into digestible lessons. From budgeting to retirement planning, this podcast is your go-to resource for mastering financial literacy.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's episode of the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Ryan Nelson is here with me, as always, the founder of Alchemy Wealth Management, one of my good buddies, and it's good to be here, man. Glad we got this longevity, and let's go ahead and jump in because, one of the things, we wouldn't be doing this podcast if we didn't have listeners, and for a while we didn't have many listeners, and now we have a few listeners, so thank you so much to everybody there, but we got a listener question here, and want to plug first shamelessly, please send us these questions. We love them. Email us, podcast@alchemywealth.com. Text us, call us, whatever it might be. We'd love to hear from you. And this one comes from one of our loyal listeners, Brandon. And his question is, I'm going to pose it to you, Ryan, is how can one navigate market crashes and economic recessions? For context, this is related to uncertainty associated with the move so far in 2025, but I'm pretty sure you can probably apply this to, honestly, any year of the financial system. So, Ryan, I'm going to go ahead and let you kind of take this here about, how would you best answer Brandon's question? What would you provide? And just to everybody out there.
Yeah, so I think any time where there is what somebody would perceive to be like market insecurity or
fluctuation.
I think it can be scary, right? And I think that's a reasonable emotion to have. And I think that's completely fine. It's okay to experience something or kind of have some unknowns and just acknowledge that this feels a little bit uncomfortable or it's a little bit scary. So I think it's completely reasonable to feel that way and to acknowledge that feeling. At the same time, I think we also want to apply some logic to it and make sure that those initial emotions we have don't drive us to make a decision we would regret in future years, right? So a couple of things I would say, like you said, I mean, so there's this really common phrase in the finance industry. It says, this time is different. So, so it's like the market goes down, the financial advisor says oh, it's going to come back up, just stay the course, right? Yeah. And then they say, but this time is different, right? Yeah. And so, they say those are the most dangerous words in investing or the most expensive words in investing. There's lots of different kind of quotes about it. But I think that, every year has something in it that is unprecedented, right? And whether that's the pandemic, some inflation, a potential war, tech bubbles, interest rate hikes, right? There's always something going on. And I think it's fair for us to acknowledge that yes, maybe this exact specific event has not happened before, right? There was all this drastic inflation. It's we haven't seen this for 100 years since the tulip bubble, or there's a pandemic. It's we haven't seen this in 100 years since the last one, right? So it is, I think it's reasonable to see these things and say, yeah, it is different. Maybe this exact situation has never come up before, right? But I love that Mark Twain quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. Yeah. But it often rhymes. Yeah. And so the same thing is true, right? When we say that stay the course and that, we've seen market volatility in the past, we don't mean that we've seen every exact possible scenario of all mankind in the past, right? Yeah. What we're referring to is, yes, markets behave in a certain way, and there may be some impetus that causes some reaction in the markets, and we've seen that reaction in the markets before, right? And so the impetus itself could be different. Again, let's not get too caught up in that. But so again, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. And so again, we've seen this stuff in the past. Let's just put some context to this. So the market drops 5% or more. Let's look at averages over the last about 70 years worth of data. Okay. So these are averages in the market over the last about 70 years. The market drops 5% or more about once every year. So what that means is, every single year we should expect some point in time. If we're investing, we should expect probably some point in time where market's down 5% throughout that year. That'd be just a normal, typical year, nothing out of the ordinary. So if we're looking at 70 about 70 years worth of data, it's happened about 70 times. If the markets drop 10% or more, about every 30 months. So that's about every 2.5 years. So almost every other year, right, we're witnessing the market drop 10% or more. So again, if we're looking at like 70 years worth of data, we're talking about this happening like 30 times.
Sure, yeah.
So again, it's not uncommon for the market to drop 10% or more. Yes, each of those times, if it dropped 30 times, yes, each of those 30 times were slightly different. But again, it all rhymes, right? But so a 10% drop or more isn't necessarily uncommon or something we didn't foresee coming. The market drops 15% or more about every 5 years. So again, if we're looking at 70 years worth of data, it's like, hey, we will have seen this thing happen about every or about 14 times, right? So about every 5 years, market will drop 15% or more, and the market will drop 20% or more about every 6 years. So again, over a 70-year time period, you're going to see 12 or something of these instances of the market dropping 20% or more. So again, I say all that to almost normalize the risk in market declines, right? It's not something that none of us see coming. If we sort of study history, so to speak, we know that there's going to be 5% declines. There's 10% declines. Even 20% declines aren't uncommon. There's been lots of them in the past, right?
Right.
And we expect more of them in the future, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I just want to pause there just to really, I think that you're rattling off these figures and they're awesome. Like it really paints the context of like, hey, you know, like this time's different. Like you hear that on the news all the time. Like you're just like, whether it be financial or whatever it is, it's like, hey, we've seen this kind of before, but this time's different. But
for sure.
Really to just what you just said over the last 70 years, oh, this has happened 14 times or this has happened 24 times over this past time. So like the idea of like, you know, everything, not everything's doom and gloom or whatever, but to really put someone's mind at ease of like, hey, you know, a 5% drop, we're probably due like for something like that. Like, so just to be able to think about it, hey, the sky's not falling when that happens. Like it's just part of the cyclical almost nature of it specifically. Sure. So I think that's really important. I'm sure you talk to your clients about that. I know you talked to me about that, but I want everybody to know that like, that it really hammer home that it's not uncommon for these things to happen for sure.
Exactly. And so I would say that like let's talk a little bit about what happens during a quote unquote crash.
Sure. Yeah.
And so asset prices start to decline, right? That kind of creates fear and sometimes panic for some people. So that accelerates the drop, right? If somebody gets a little scared and they sell more, that makes it drop a little bit more, right? Then news headlines intensify that negative sentiment. It's kind of this snowball effect that starts building on itself, right? And then so investors will sell more, right? And oftentimes you're selling at the worst time. You don't want to sell when it's down, right? And then there's maybe some economic slowdowns that lead to potential job losses or reduced like spending and slower growth. And so it's this kind of this compounding thing that builds on itself. And so again, going back to the beginning, it's fair for that to be scary, right? It doesn't mean we want to make a rash decision with our finances, but it's fair to look at that and say, man, this is a little bit uncomfortable. It would also though be fair to look at it and say, this is kind of part of the system. I understand this happens, and maybe it doesn't even fear you. The more you sort of empower yourself with knowledge and start to familiarize yourself with what happens, you might find yourself even in a position though where what once scared you now doesn't even bother you. You just understand it as part of the process. And so I always like to say, in this question, I don't know that it was specifically towards recessions and there's sort of a definition of recessions, but like not worrying about that so much. Like what I would say is recessions are normal. So they're a part of the cycle, not a failure of the system. So again, as we're investing, this is a part of this investment cycle, not a failure of the system. I think a lot of times we think of this as, oh my God, there's a recession. The system must be failing.
Right.
It's like, no, that's part of the cyclical cycle of investing. We expect this to happen. Anytime it happens, that's completely like, we may not have anticipated exactly why or exactly when, but we do anticipate there will be another one. That's part of the natural cycle of investing. It's not a failure of the system, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, it absolutely does. Is that I'm guessing you probably didn't make up that quote. That's probably a pretty common one. The recessions are normal. They're part of the cycle, not a failure of the system.
No, I've never heard that quote before.
Okay. yeah. Quote it.
Did I publish that?
Yeah, I was going to say, should we copyright that?
Can you copyright that?
Yeah, like that's great. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying.
But yeah, that's a really good, great way to paint it for sure. It's part of the cycle. Like the panic piece of it is all. I think about it like this, just a little personal thing. In 2020, when COVID happened and everybody was getting laid off and sent home and all these different things, at that point, it's just funny. It's like, what do you do at that time, those situations? And my fiance at the time and we started working with you at that point. That's when we were like, hey, you know what? Like, we don't know what's going to happen here, but we're guessing everything's going to probably be okay, but let's start planning for this. Like, what happens if this step? And I don't know if it's a right, wrong time. You never really know with those kind of things, but I think it's just important to like, hey, how do you now view these certain opportunities, more of opportunities versus like really negative things, I suppose. So, just a little personal anecdote there, but
I love it.
Yeah.
So we kind of talked about like what happens during a market crash. Now let's talk about how you could navigate it wisely. So the best thing, have a plan before it hits. Now, if you're in the middle of this, you can't go retroactively back and create a plan, right? But like, I use this quote all the time. This one I can't attribute to me. I don't know who to attribute it to, but like
Vinny Bush.
The best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today, right? And so similarly, I'm telling you, create a plan. If you didn't already create a plan in the past, create it now, right? Yep. And so you should come up with a plan for your asset allocation, what your time horizon is, what your risk tolerance is. You should have an investment plan. And then if you're properly invested, the crash isn't going to change your strategy. It should be affirming your strategy, right? And so, if there's a market crash, perfect. If we have a plan ahead of time, we're following that plan. We already know our asset allocation. We know our time horizon. We know our risk tolerance, and we're able to stay the course. And it's pretty funny. Like, I've had lots of conversations over the last number of weeks with clients, and a reoccurring theme is they thought their portfolio would be down more than it is. But we are appropriately invested with the right time horizon, the right risk tolerance, and they're always shocked at like how well their account has performed relative to their perception of what would have happened.
Sure.
And again, that's just a product of having a plan, knowing what we're working towards, evaluating a proper risk tolerance and risk capacity, and then applying this. And again, they're not taking unneeded amounts of risk. If you're just, what I hear all the time is somebody will just be like invested in the S&P 500. They don't have a plan.
Right.
They don't know how much, they're not taking the right amount of risk. They just said, oh, I heard that investing in the S&P 500 is a cheap way to invest. It's like, yeah, it is a cheap way. Is that a good plan?
What's your plan?
Yeah.
Goal.
Yeah. and so again, these are the times where it really sort of bring some of this stuff to light, and you can start to actually see like, oh, okay, this is the value of a plan. This is the value of taking the right amount of risk. And again, it just kind of sheds some light on that. The other thing I'd say, so again, how to navigate this wisely would be, do not try to time the market. So, timing the market, again, we did a podcast on this, but I love the quote, it's time in the market, not timing of the market. So the key is to be invested for a long time, not trying to get in at the bottom and sell at the top. Nobody has that crystal ball. Nobody can accurately predict it. You'd have to theoretically predict it twice. You'd have to know when the bottom is and the top is. It's hard enough to predict it once.
Yep.
You're not going to predict it twice. It's a fool's errand. Oftentimes, the biggest gains come after the biggest losses. So you'll see a lot of times after some of those really, really bad days in the market, what happens the next day or in the next couple of days? Oftentimes there's a really, really good day, right? So if you're out of the market, you're going to miss those sort of like bounce back days, as they call them. The other thing I'd say is focus on what you can control. So, I know we talked in a previous episode as well about that Venn diagram I like to draw about things that are important and things you can control. And it makes sense to focus on what you can control. There's lots of things out there that might be stressing you out that you can't control. Don't let them stress you out. You can't control them. Control the things you can control. It'll make you feel empowered, and you can actually control a lot more than you think. So market movements are not something you can control, but there is a lot of things you can control. Your spending, your savings rate, your rebalancing, your tax strategy, your asset allocation, having a goal, right? If you do all of those things you can control, you're going to be a really, really good spot. Yeah. You're going to feel empowered. You don't feel helpless. And you're going to be in a really, really good spot. Yep. The other thing I'd say is keep a long-term view. So every downturn in modern history has been followed by a recovery. Every single one in modern history has been followed by a recovery. So if you stay invested throughout, you'll participate in the downs, you'll participate in the ups, but it's not just a downturn. There's going to be a recovery that follows it, right? So keep a long-term approach. All the downturns are just temporary. We don't know if it'll be a day, a week, a month, a year, 2 years, right? We don't know,
right?
But again, if you use if you sort of use history as any indicator. Again, every market downturn in past modern day history has been followed by a recovery.
Yep. Use that rhyming history quote by Mark Twain there. Like, hey, like,
yeah,
we haven't maybe seen that specifically, but we've seen something similar.
Yeah.
And, like you said, tends to come back. The recovery will happen. How long it takes, once again, out of your control. But as long as you have that long-term view. And it's funny for me to think about, and I'm sure you see it with your clients too, is like, I'm sure the way that you talk to me as a 34-year-old man and like how you talk to somebody who's maybe 64.
Sure.
Like with these things, I'm sure it has like a different view of
definitely.
what the long-term and short-term and stuff
Sure.
too. So, I mean, hopefully one day I'll get to that point where I'm like having that conversation about like, cool, like it's about that time, Aaron, kind of thing. Like, but it's just something I was just thinking of about. Like, I love talking long-term because like in my mind, I'm still like young.
Yeah.
My body says differently, but like, thinking about how that conversation is going to change over time is interesting just in general to think about for sure.
Absolutely. And then the other thing I would say that you can do during a market return is reframe volatility as an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe volatility is an opportunity, but a lot of people see it as this negative thing. And so it creates like anxiety or angst for them. And I'm like, gosh, you really don't need to experience that anxiety or angst, because this is actually something that I think is a good thing for you long term, that like valuable. It should be like making you like almost happy in some ways.
Yeah.
And you have this like unneeded angst, right? So reframing volatility as an opportunity. So when downturns are when future gains are like quote unquote on sale, right? Everybody has probably heard that. Like,
right.
The market's on sale, right? But there's some truth to that. Like there really is. You can also, it creates other opportunities. So a good, this would be one where you really want to dive deeper in, but maybe it's a good time to do Roth conversions while the market's down. Good time to do tax loss harvesting. Good time to dollar cost average into a market. Good time to potentially rebalance a portfolio, right? Those are all, again, some maybe more technically advanced strategies, but they're opportunities nonetheless that were created because of the volatility that would not exist necessarily, or not exist to the same extent without the volatility. So the volatility is creating this opportunity that we otherwise wouldn't have, that can ultimately increase your long-term expected returns or your long-term gains. So yeah, if something can happen that increases our long-term gains, I see that as a positive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just that reframing mentality of it, I think is big about like, cool, how do I take this as an opportunity versus like a detractor, if you will. And I think that depending on where you're at in your life, obviously, like it depends, but like just being able to switch that on, I'm sure for like, we've heard that saying, like you said, market's on sale.
Yeah.
Like, cool, like it's on sale if you do the right thing with it. Like depending on what you're gonna do, like you have to be specifically doing maybe what works best in that situation versus just like, cool, I'm buying all the stocks because everything's down. Like, maybe I don't know.
Yeah,
that might not be a best idea. So, it's a great. And you called out some of the other things, the Roth conversions. We've covered those on previous podcast topics too. So please go back, and if you think you'd be interested in that or whatever, check that out. Give a little bit of context on what that actually means and how you can learn that as well too.
Yep, perfect. Yeah, so in summary, what I would say is, during market downturns, it can feel like hard or scary, and that fear is like part of being human and completely natural and normal. So, that's not a sign that you're doing it wrong, right? Like that can just be a normal part of being human. But hopefully over time and with further education and stuff, you might be able to, again, even get to a point, like I said earlier, where what once made you fearful now doesn't scare you at all and you see as an opportunity. And again, I think you mostly get there through education and experience and exposure. So that's not unrealistic to think that, again, what once made you scared, you could now like embrace as an opportunity. The other thing I'd say is if you're going to make a big change, like if it's really panicking and you want to cash out or like sell everything or you're scared, talk to like a trusted person. I think like a trusted advisor would be a good person. My fear here is you don't want to talk to somebody in the same echo chamber as you.
Right.
If you and all your close coworkers all see the same politically and all kind of reiterate and kind of hype, like build each other up and kind of create this again, echo chamber of like panic, then if you go ask them a question, they're just going to regurgitate and throw back at you like the same things you guys have all been talking about, right? So that would not be a good place to go get like good advice about a big change, right? But you might be able to ask a parent, you might be able to ask a sibling, you might be able to ask a coworker, you might be able to ask a boss, you might be able to ask a child, you might be able to ask just a good friend, you might be able to ask a financial advisor, right? But it's not a bad idea if you're about to make a huge financial decision, like sell all the stocks you own.
Sure. Yeah.
Talk to a couple people,
Yeah.
see what they say. Maybe some of them will help kind of talk you off that edge and like keep you from jumping off that roller coaster, right?
Yeah.
And then I would say, think about your plan. So your plan should be built for both bull and bear markets. All of our clients' plans, they're built knowing those statistics I recited at the beginning of the episode, that we're going to have multiple 20% downturns, multiple 15% downturns, multiple 10% downturns. So build a plan, build it for both bull and bear markets. And then when these things happen, we say, perfect, this is part of the plan. Like,
right.
We literally built this into the plan. We knew that we didn't know the exact day this would happen. We didn't know exactly to what extent. We didn't know exactly what would trigger it, but we knew there would be multiple of these events, and they're built into the plan. So it's nothing to be scared about. And the last thing I'll say is obviously sort of a mantra of ours. I sign off all my newsletters this way. We sign off every podcast this way, right? It's stay the course. Like, that's so incredibly valuable.
Yes.
Stay the course.
Yes.
Have your plan, follow it, right? But one thing I will note is staying the course, I think to a lot of people sounds like a passive decision.
Sure.
It's not. It does take discipline. It's easy to get scared and spooked and like maybe want to sell everything, right? I will say staying the course, sometimes like you could almost reframe it as being this like passive, I'm doing nothing decision, to this active, like proactive decision that betters your financial situation, right? And if something's happening that like panics you, makes you want to sell, the act of not selling and staying the course is this proactive decision that's like setting you up for long-term success, right? So just another way to kind of think about staying the course.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Just being able to, hitting that word, reframing like what staying the course means, because we've all probably heard the story of like the tortoise and the hare.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
It's like, cool. Like, just if you have your goal, you know when you're going to get there, you're planning for all these different things. Like if you equate that to financial planning, it's like, all right, if you have your plan, it's built into this, and you just keep following that, things could be on fire around you, and you're just like, cool, we're just going to keep doing this. Like, eventually you should be able to get to your goal. And in the end, like, you're like, yeah, I weathered it. Makes things a lot less scary as well, too. If you're just like, cool, like, I know what I have to do every month or every year or whatever it might be, like, and being able to stay on that course, I think is just incredible. So like I like you said, you sign off with everything with that. I think it's important for people to know what that actually kind of means and how important it is, and how it can be a very, very beneficial thing in honestly in life in general.
Absolutely.
Just to get
Absolutely.
there. So
it's since you loved it so much, I'll just reiterate one more time. So recessions are normal.
Yes,
they're part of the cycle, not a failure of the system. So,
I love it. I love it. So
yep.
Hopefully, Brandon, that answered your question in a long-winded way. You got some information from this, and we'll be back on the other side of this, talk a little bit personal stuff. But really appreciate the question, man, and keep them coming, guys. Everybody, hang tight.
And now to put the personal in personal finance.
All right, Ryan, we are back on the personal side of the fiscal physical. I'd love to get your thoughts on this about what, I guess, advice would you give to somebody who is potentially thinking about starting their own podcast?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I don't pretend to be like a professional podcaster, right?
Let's not get there.
Yeah. I think like I always, like when I talk about the book, I always describe myself as a financial advisor who wrote a book, not an author who does financial advice, right? So I kind of consider myself the same. Like I'm a financial advisor who does a podcast, not a podcaster who does finance, right? Yeah. So there's probably something there. Like certainly Joe Rogan knows a lot more than we do about successful podcasts, right? But one stat I did find, like again, bringing it back to staying the course, right? When the market is down, which we just talked about, like staying the course, having a plan, following that plan. A couple episodes ago, we talked about like starting a career in financial advice, and it's just like grinding through, right? It's not always like easy at the beginning. Like I think all of that just applies. And so I found some stats here.
Love stats.
I don't know how accurate these are, but I feel like this is the type of thing. I pulled these stats off of Reddit. So
sure.
In full transparency. This is
the user was Hoisington 1.
So I would never encourage a client go to Reddit for financial advice. So I probably shouldn't go to Reddit for podcast advice. But I guess I just don't care as much about my podcast advice. So according to this Reddit user who hopefully got this data from somewhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They said that there were 2 million podcasts out there, and 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3. So again, there's a lot of podcasts. Only 10% of them have more than 3 episodes.
Wow.
So 1.8 million people quit in the first 3 episodes. Of the 200,000 that are left, 90% quit after 20 episodes. So that's another $180,000.
Mm-hmm.
180,000 podcasts that are basically gone. So now we've just narrowed it down from 2 million to 20,000, just getting past 20 episodes, which is crazy. And only 1% of podcasts publish 21 episodes. And therefore 21.
Right.
Yeah. So, so pretty crazy. So, as long as you just keep like grinding and like it, it compound. This is the same type of thing. It's like anything else. It compounds, right? So I would just say, apply like grit and tenacity and just keep going and stay the course. And I think you can like accomplish a lot more. I feel like I've used a lot of quotes in this episode, but I love this quote. I feel like it's been modified a bunch of different ways now, but it's from Ray Kroc, the guy who founded McDonald's.
Okay, yeah.
And so he says, "I was an overnight success, all right, but 30 years is a long, long night." Right? And again, I've heard a lot of people kind of modify that quote, like I was a 30-year overnight success or whatever and stuff. And like it's so true, right? Like none of these people just publish I shouldn't say never, but like largely all these successful podcasts, they don't just publish a podcast and then get 1,000 or 1 million or 2 million views on the very first one, right? Nobody knows about it.
Right.
So, and if they do, if it's the people who do that, they've built their success elsewhere somewhere. They have a reputation that they're then just applying to podcasts, right? So it's not even fair or representative. So that person who originally built their initial reputation would have had to build it like one person at a time, basically, right? And so again, I think the same is true. Like you just have to build it like anything else and stay the course and stay disciplined and have a little bit of grit, and it starts compounding. After just time. So that's my 2 cents, but curious your thoughts. I mean, you have more experience with podcasting than me. So what's your opinion?
And a lot of it is exactly what you're saying. Like as far as I remember when we did our first few episodes of this, I was like, okay, this is rough. Like we're rough a little bit. Like let's just keep going. Let's see how this goes. Let's do a few more. And we got to like episode 20 or so, and I was like, oh, cool. Like I think we have a pretty good rhythm.
Sure.
Not only with like how you. So my biggest I guess advice or whatever is organization. Like you crush organization. That's something you're very good at. You introduced me to the product that we use now, Notion, to like outline stuff. Like, so one, find something that excites you to do the podcast on, because like, and something you can do multiple episodes on, because some people are like, oh, cool. Like I like, European football or something like that. It's like, great. Like, how much can you do before you run out of this? Or like, but with the financial industry, it's so broad, it's so vast, and find something that really does excite you to do that. I know that like for myself, like I don't particularly get jazzed about finances, but every time I come home after recording an episode with you, I am fired up. Like I think it's so great, and I hope that our listeners kind of get that as well too. So if you're passionate about something, you're willing to dedicate the time to put into it and to get better, and know you're not going to be the best at the start of it, but you can reach more people. And I shameless plug for ourselves, I see just the number of listeners we get per week has gone up dramatically.
Oh,
and like, I don't know if we've done specifically anything different besides just stay the course with it too. And maybe hopefully we've gotten a little bit better. I don't know. Like, I can't really say that, but I think that it's important to look back on, 75 episodes. Cool. Like where were we at number 1? Where are we at now? And just cool. We've made it into that like 1% according to those statistics of like the podcasts in the world. So pretty neat overall. So
it really is.
I don't know if we gave too much advice there besides like just stay the course. Stay the course. If it's something you're passionate about, something you want to do, and you have the right tools, technology to get it done, do it. It's really, you have all the resources these days to do this. Like
absolutely.
And hopefully you find something that you enjoy. So get after it. But anything else, Ryan, before we play us out here?
As always, stay the course.
Thank you for joining us for the Fiscal Physical Podcast. Until next time, happy listening. And as always, stay the course. If you have a question or topic suggestions, please email us at podcast@alchemywealth.com. If you enjoyed today's discussion, subscribe to the podcast to ensure you never miss an episode. And consider leaving us a rating and review on your favorite platform. This helps other listeners like you Find the show. For more resources, you can visit Alchemy Wealth Management's website at www.alchemywealth.com or find your Fiscal Physical, the book, on Amazon. We'd be remiss if we didn't mention that personal finance is just that, personal. Please don't take anything we say as advice. The preceding content is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It's not an offer or a solicitation, nor should it be construed or relied upon for tax, legal, or investment advice. It doesn't consider your personal financial situation or objectives and may not be suitable for you.